It's been a while, something like 4 years, in fact, since I last had the privilege and challenge to share reflections, a kinder word perhaps than a sermon, which Webster once defined as a tedious moral homily, back on point to offer a sermon for Emmanuel's High Holy Days. And I'm grateful to Rabbi Marantz for the invitation, but I don't want there to be any confusion or concern. He has regularly offered, and I have regularly deferred. The last few years, because of my work with the progressive, a funny word for non-Orthodox, the small progressive Jewish community in Bangkok. Yes, there are Jews there. To the point at hand, since agreeing to share with you, I've gotten reacquainted with an experience familiar to many colleagues who would have a depth encounter, and hear the perfect Yiddish word, spilkies. For those unfamiliar, ants in the pants is an insufficient translation, in the lead up to these days of awe. In part, of course, because of the drama, the consequence and challenge of any cheshbon hanefesh, an inventory of the soul. For if we be honest, who doesn't fall short of the person we hope to be, pretend to be, wish if only to become? But as well, a less noble matter invades consciousness, more precisely the worrying of just about every rabbi who cares for the community he, and I'm glad to add, she may serve. The old bromide is that one has to be really on game, do really well, since this is one of the few times when many show up, let alone are listening. In fact, forgive a personal conceit, my wonderful life partner, Karen, loves to go for late summer evening walks. And I'm grateful for so many things, including the opportunity to accompany her. However, one of the awkward tropes of those early evening perambulations would often include her observation on the phases of the moon, which, when it's Elul, the Hebrew month which precedes Rosh Hashanah, I would anxiously respond, "Oi, when that moon's done, your husband is on the line." As for today, I've been reflecting on both what to say and searching for material that will help me convey and, more vitally, have you respond, even embrace its wisdom. Oh, why not add a little chutzpah as well as humorous intent? After all, I just turned 74. Embrace my wisdom. So consider, I still get the newspapers every morning, and I unashamedly admit I still read the comic strips. If you happen to be familiar with one called Prickly City, much of the time I'm uncomfortable with its creator's partisan slant on our nation's politics, which means to say I don't agree with him. Or to be less polite and more in keeping with contemporary discourse, he's wrong, nasty, argumentative, bullheaded, and did I mention mean and nasty? Well, I guess that's not true all the time, as in this recent offering. One of his characters, speaking about the pandemic, offers, "We've been through a tumultuous time. I wonder what lessons we've learned." The other character responds, "Zoom is now a verb. That's about it." Well, I believe we've learned far more. Indeed, the real challenge is how we might apply our hard-earned learning to benefit others and maybe, just maybe, heal ourselves. And that leads me to a favorite text of Torah. While not the frightening pace of the Akedah, the binding and almost sacrifice, the attempted murder of Isaac, it involves struggle. In fact, it's on the short list for most famous wrestling matches in history. You are likely familiar as Jacob wrestles with someone, something, and he emerges from that encounter wounded. The text says, limping for the rest of his life. And even if it be metaphor only, isn't that a major component of any, I'd argue, every serious personal journey? We all encounter disappointment. We all must find ways to respond to tragedy and pain. We have no choice, for we are all wounded, limping, broken. And if we somehow are fortunate, we may identify with the reflection of the great mystic Rabbi Nachman of Breslov when he reminds us, maybe urges us to embrace the conviction, the fact, that there is nothing so whole as a broken heart. So it is that Jacob cum Israel responds to his distress with a lesson for all and for all times. I will not let you go ki im berachtani, until you bless me. So to speak, I did not want this to happen, but since it has, what now? What next? What can I do? For everything can be taken away from us with one exception: how we respond to what has been taken from us. You may share my amazement and awe, as there are people who endure the moral equivalent of a hangnail, and their whole world seems to fall apart. Their complaints pour out in endless variations of a plaintive, "Why me?" While others, and we know them, suffer a kaleidoscope of indignities, yet they insist that even if an occasional "why me" may intrude, the really important question, at least for them, and a vital instruction for us: what can I do now? Equally on point, I get much of my morning news from NPR's Morning Edition. As someone with more than passing interest in poetry, I'm a fan of Kwame Alexander. For those unfamiliar, he serves as their poet in residence, and every month he introduces a competition in which he shares a poem and lifts a line from it in order to invite listeners to add their own completions. In the midst of the COVID-19 lockdown pandemic, may it end soon, he read a poem by Nancy Cross Dunham titled, "What I Learned from Grief." And one of the most compelling listener offerings was, "What I learned from grief is love that has no place to go." And while one can hear, and too many of us no doubt may identify with that pain, love with no place to go, my immediate reaction was yes, but there is always a place, even perhaps the lesson that we must integrate into our lives and act upon. There is, if not a place, there are things we can do, for love always has places. I wish there were a more inclusive word: to go, engage, to make a difference. And even if we are, alas, never the same again, we can make a difference with our love in other lives, with other persons, and in worthy causes. And here Judaism offers an interesting corrective, an assertion. For we often are stuck in the past, in the habits that keep us from goals, ambitions, the connections we insist we want, we so much need, yet so regularly sabotage. Perhaps you will acknowledge how often you may have heard or even offered something that resembles, "When I finally overcome the barriers that keep me stuck in this or that emotional dead end," name the particular challenge: neurotic and self-defeating behaviors, smoking, alcohol, drugs, abusive relationships, etc., then I'll finally have my act together. And then finally, I'll be ready for some real growth in wisdom, character, and most importantly, behavior. So we postpone the very activities and actions that will relieve the circumstances that keep us trapped in a cycle of somnolence, or if not more likely, despair. Such matters reinforce the wisdom at the heart of the Jewish approach to life. Namely, it is easier to act one's way into right thinking than to think one's way into right acting. Rather than waiting for the just so perfect moment, we need to act with the conviction that you have to change your life in order to change your life. Nike made a fortune on a variation: just do it. So we can wallow in our disappointment, our hurt and pain, or we can get to work relieving others. For in so doing, if nothing else, we can and we shall, I guarantee it, better ourselves. Yes, we are all wounded, or as the poet reminds, the world breaks everyone, but afterwards some are strong in the broken places. Consider this instructive and true story from World War II. As the bombers that returned from their missions were commonly riddled, that an understatement, riddled with bullet holes, the first response was, not surprisingly, to add armor to those areas most heavily damaged. However, the statistician Abraham Wald made what seemed like a counterintuitive recommendation, namely, to add armor to those parts with no damage. He understood that the planes that had been shot where no bullet holes were seen were the planes that never made it back. That's, of course, where the real problem was. Armor was added to the seemingly undamaged places, and losses decreased dramatically. I believe that may teach us that, yes, we are wounded, yet we have survived. But the true lesson is to reframe the wounds we have endured as reminders, not only of our strength and survival, so to speak, our safe landing, but also that we can, if not fly, we can more than survive. We may thrive. And the key is to connect and care and uplift and inspire and share with others in this community, in all the communities in which we are a part. For love always, always has a place to go. Please don't assume that all of this simply comes down to we need to be nice, albeit I rush to point out I'm not against that. But there is an exquisite selfishness in our reaching out to others. For in our desire to help the other, to love others, we undoubtedly are engaged in an altruistically selfish act of helping ourselves. So an article that appeared in a recent issue of the Wall Street Journal. The title, Why Being Kind Helps You Too, Especially Now. One item from that story. The key to our success is not survival of the fittest, a psychology professor at Stanford says. It's survival of the friendliest. Later, when we're kind, a part of the reward system called the nucleus accumbens activates. I've lived all this time and I didn't know I had a nucleus accumbens. Our brain responds the same way it would, here's the best part, if we ate a piece of chocolate cake. Well, I love chocolate cake. And shall we say this suggests a very interesting diet plan? One we might all find successful in helping to overcome our pain, our limping, our disappointments, our wounds and tragedies, which is why I pray that 5781 will be the time that we do more and more, for in that effort we will become more and more. For I firmly believe, as the late Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai insisted, when I was a boy, I sang in the synagogue choir. I sang till my voice broke. I sang first voice, second voice, and I'll keep on singing a song. And please, won't you join me? Please sing with me. For then a joyful melody will fill our hearts, our souls, and God willing, that song will fill just a little more and more of our world. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May that be God's will. Amen.